you like that? Not curse, to serve you, spirit of freedom. And so now we want to hear announcements. Anybody have any announcements? Jean.
I have a couple of announcements. Anybody who likes hot tea, there are, I think, something like 5 jugs of tea in the refrigerator and a microwave on the counter in the kitchen. So feel free, please. Also, that was left at the picnic with some lemonade in it. And I don't know who it belongs to, so it's there for you.
It usually just stays in the kitchen here.
Does it? Okay. And there are chips on the table. Please take one.
They're not buffalo chips, so.
No, they're not buffalo chips.
Anybody else have an announcement? Jim.
So just one announcement, we will have a board meeting next Sunday. It's the 3rd Sunday of the month, so after service, we will have a board meeting. So that's it. Thank you.
Anybody else? I understand the Wednesday night service meeting group is on hiatus, so.
And if you didn't show up Thursday, you missed it. So our writing group meets the second Thursday, just a reminder. And we've had people out of town, so it's a good group, and we enjoy each other's company.
It is. This is true. Our speaker next Sunday will be Doug Traversa, and his topic is, how did I miss that? That should be interesting. Our speaker this Sunday is Jason Coomes, etc. He'll have to introduce everyone else. And we are very glad to have him here. He is a speaker that Lisa set up before she left. So I think I love the blues, so what can I say? So Jason.
My name is Jason. I usually go by Jasco, a shortened nickname version of my full name. And I've been a blues player for most of my life. I'm here to speak to you about blues and blues history. And I find it kind of ironic to come to a church to speak about blues because 100 years ago, blues was known as the devil's music. It was kind of the flip side of the coin of gospel music. And is anybody here familiar with the old bluesman Robert Johnson?
Oh yeah.
One of the hugest influences on rock and roll and modern music. The Robert Johnson legend has it that the reason that he was so good at playing guitar is that he went down to the crossroads and sold his soul to the devil in exchange for his guitar ability. So
good play.
So we all know that's really a tale about the sacrifices that you've got to make when you want to be really committed to something in life. Whether it's music or your profession or your hobbies, your religion, whatever. When you're really committed, you gotta sell something. You gotta give something. You gotta sacrifice something for it. And that's what that story is talking about. But before I go further into blues, I'll talk a little bit about my history, how I came into blues, and hopefully what qualifies me to speak about blues. When I was a teenager, I fell in love with guitar playing, and at that time it was rock music. Being a teenager, I wanted to do loud electric guitar stuff, and so I started playing the rock and roll of that era, and I started playing in clubs and so forth when I was about 16 years old. But shortly after that, at the end of the 90s, the bottom fell out of the rock and roll kind of market, and I was thinking, what do I do with this guitar skill that I've got? And I went to see a blues guitar player named Chris Duarte that just changed my life. And I was like, wow, I've got the skills to do that. And that's such cool music. It's very similar to the rock I was playing, but it's got a different slant on it. So that was my door into the blues. After that, I formed a blues band in my early 20s called Blind Dog Smokin' that toured across the United States and the world for 12 years. Eventually, it was Blind Dog Smokin' was nominated for a Grammy. That was a few years after I left, so I never got nominated for the Grammy. But those guys went on to some big successes. And although I play all types of music, what I've mainly played is blues, and that's my passion in life is playing the blues. So I've done lots of festivals, got to meet some of my heroes and so forth, and that's really what I dig doing. So blues came from old African American field haulers and gospel music. There's influences of both of that, and it went on to influence all types of music. I consider blues like the central hub of American music. Whether you're listening to country or rock and roll or jazz, it's all taken parts of the blues and kind of infuse that in there. So I tell all my students, no matter what type of music they want to play, that if you learn some blues, it's going to help you play that style better, because there's going to be things that come up in any of those styles that you can say, oh yeah, that's taken from the blues. It makes it easier to learn songs. You can say, oh, that's just a 12-bar blues with a little modification or whatever. And so having some blues in your playing helps no matter what type of music you play. And also being from America, just listening to rock and roll and country and jazz on the radio, when you hear blues, it's familiar sounds. Even though you might not have listened to a lot of blues, it still sounds, and you can say, oh yeah, that sounds familiar. And what I found is you can play blues for almost any audience and they're going to like it. Whereas if you play country for a rock audience or vice versa, they might not like it. But you can slip some blues songs into a country gig or into a rock gig or into a jazz gig, and it's not going to get thrown out of the club. So originally blues was played on acoustic instruments. I mean, electric guitar wasn't really invented and developed until the late 40s, early 50s. So the guitar that I've got over there is a 1929 National Resonator guitar, and that might be typical of high-end blues players 100 years ago. But let me give you a little demonstration real quick, because a lot of blues was played by poor people in the South. If you're a poor person in the South at the 100 years ago, and you want to play blues, you might not be able to afford a guitar like this. You might not be able to afford a guitar at all. Maybe it's just harmonica, but you still want to play some blues stuff. So what you would do instead of having a guitar is you would take a wire and string it on the side of your house or on a board, tighten it up with 2 screws as tight as you can, and it's still not going to be that tight. But then you stick a bottle or a brick under it, slide it to one side so the wire goes up there, down there, and the farther you slide it, the tighter it gets. And pretty soon you have one tight wire. Okay, so what can you do with one tight wire? Well, if I play this and pretend I don't have any frets, I get a top of a beer bottle or something, I can slide it up and get different sounds. So I can take one wire, and all of a sudden, make a little bit of music on it. So that one string instrument was called a diddley bow. And you might be familiar with a rocker in the 50s named Bo Diddley.
Yeah.
His stage name, Bo Diddley, is a play on a diddley bow. And nowadays a lot of people wouldn't know what a diddley bow is, but back in the 50s a lot of people would know what a diddley bow is. So when he came out with his name, Bo Diddley, that was a familiar term that people were used to. So, and he was one of the early guys that infused lots of blues and rock and roll. I mean, his stuff is so crossover. Is he blues or is he rock? It's hard to say. So in the 30s and 40s, mostly acoustic blues. It was mostly solo guitar players that would play and sing on a guitar, because if you start to put drums or horns with an acoustic guitar, it just drowns it out. It's not loud enough to keep up with the whole band. So mostly you just have solo players. And then when the electric guitar is developed in the, and mass marketed, Fender's the first one that came out with electric guitars, mass marketed for sale in, I think it's 1948. So then all of a sudden you've got an instrument that can keep up with drums and horns and be loud enough to play in a band situation. So then you start to have blues bands like Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf playing in full bands, playing for clubs, and that's what eventually led to the rock and roll thing. And a lot of those players at that time, because of other social things going on in America, were migrating from the South up to Chicago, Detroit, some of the northern areas for work. So, a lot of the original blues bands, electric blues bands, are from the Chicago area. That's the area that's famous for its blues. Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf being the two key Chicago guys. By the maybe end of the 50s, early 60s, blues in America had started to really die out. It was taken over for African American crowds by R&B music, and for white crowds by rock and roll. So, 1960, early 60s, Beatles come out. They're still blues influenced, but people here in America aren't really listening or paying attention to blues that much anymore. But a lot of the English kids, for some reason, really latched onto that blues sound. Eric Clapton, Jeff Beck, Jimmy Page, guitar players like that really got into the blues thing, and because of their love of the blues, they brought back the blues. And then you had American bands pick it back up, like Paul Butterfield, and the blues saw kind of a revival because the English bands had brought back that sound into their rock and roll. And if you read old interviews with those guys, all they were talking about was the blues. That's what they liked.
Yeah, were skiffle bands in Britain an offshoot or a response to blues influence?
The skiffle bands, I'm not super familiar with. They were earlier, like 50s and so forth. But I don't know exactly what their relationship to the blues was. That's an interesting question. I know a lot of the rockers, like Jeff Beck, talk about playing in skiffle bands before they were, got their main things going on and so forth.
I remember hearing interviewed by British musicians who came along after the war. They were teenagers, say, after the war, late 40s,
Right.
50s. They formed these skiffle bands, among other as one expression, but they talked about getting these blues records from America from sailors and airmen, soldiers who were still stationed in Britain, but they were anxious to get their hands on these blues records from the United States. And there's sort of this kind of underground transfer of blues influence.
Yeah, in all those guys' old interviews, you read how rare the blues records were, and when somebody would get a blues record, all the other musicians would go over to their house and say, "Oh, we got this record, we all got to listen to it." It was like a big, exciting thing. It's a lot different than mass media today, where you can create something that's all over the internet and the world the next day. It was rare to get that stuff. So yeah, that's definitely a consideration, and cool, interesting story about how valuable that music was to those kids in Britain, because they couldn't just turn on YouTube and watch the latest blues concert. So then, blues received its revival from that. It started dying down again, by the 80s. You didn't have too much blues music that was popular. It was, kind of 1% of the national market. But there were a couple things that helped it out. In the mid-80s, a guitar player named Stevie Ray Vaughan came out, and all of a sudden, he by himself put blues back on the market. He appealed enough to the rockers that the rock and roll kids would listen to him, but he still had enough of the old-time blues that people that really were into the blues for itself got into it. And I remember when Stevie Ray died, which I believe was 1990, he died in a helicopter crash, when he was 36 or 37 years old. And it seemed like after his death, his popularity even exploded more, and blues really became a big thing, a big resurgence in the 90s. And that's when my band Blind Dog Smoking was touring all across the States and a little bit in Europe. And there were so many Stevie Ray copy guys. We refused to do any Stevie Ray songs because every town in America, you could go to a town in Wyoming with 3 people, and we'd swear one of those was a Stevie Ray copy guy. They were just everywhere. That's how popular he was and how much he brought back the blues. And there's, you know, lots of the blues players that we know today, kind of more of the modern era, Kenny Wayne Shepherd, Tab Benoit, all those guys got their start in that blues resurgence at the beginning of the 90s. So we got to thank Stevie Ray for that. And the other thing about the blues that has really helped it is, even though it's not a big thing on the market as far as like radio play or as far as record sales, there are blues societies all over the United States. You can go, you know, to any state and there's going to be blues societies. You can't say the same thing. There's not going to be a rock society or a country society or a jazz society, you know, but there's blues societies all over, and that's part of the reason I'm here at Tennessee Blues Society. You guys found me on the website and contacted me, and here I am. But those blues societies, they help sponsor live blues events. They help sponsor blues competitions like the International Blues Challenge. And they keep that alive at a grassroots level. And there's not another type of music that I know of that has such a grassroots support so widely, you know, across the whole United States and even in Europe. So, you know, blues societies are another reason to thank for the ongoing, you know, influence or whatever of the blues. So, any questions at this point? Should we do a little bit of playing?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do we need to adjust the camera, or is it good if I just sit here?
Yeah. Do whatever you want.
So, blues playing is, at its essence, very simple. Relies on 3 chords. One chord, second chord, third chord. And old blues songs are structured typically in 3 phrases, where a singer would sing one phrase, they would repeat the same phrase, and then they would give you an answer or a response on the 3rd phrase. And so, we start on one of the chords.
Can you pull your chair out this way?
Sure thing.
I'm sorry, I should have done that. Yeah, there we go.
Is that good? Everyone can see and hear now?
Yeah.
So, I'm not a singer at all. I'm just a player, so I'll just talk through some lyrics and make up a fake blues song here. So I might start on one of the chords and say, you know, I woke up this morning, you know, trouble looking my way. Then I play the next chord, woke up this morning, trouble's looking my way. I play the 3rd chord, I shouldn't have got out of bed, troubles are here to stay. Makes sense with it. And then back to the 1st chord. So, if you listen to a lot of the old blues stuff, it's kind of loosely formatted like that. Since they were playing by themselves, they didn't have to stay strictly in rhythm like they would with the band, and they didn't have to stay with a strict sense of chord changes like they would with the band. As soon as you start having multiple people playing together, then you've all got to be coordinated on the rhythm and the chord changes. So what that developed into was a 12-measure structure called a 12-bar blues, where you would play the first phrase. So 12-measure structure, we're going to divide it into 3 phrases again. The first phrase starts on the 1st chord. The second phrase, we go to the next chord. Back to the 1st chord just for some little bit of break of action. The last phrase, the answer phrase, go to the 3rd chord, and kind of a turnaround. That leads back to the beginning of the structure again. And you can just repeat that structure as many times as you need for how many verses you have. And the cool thing about that is you can take that and make lots of different songs out of it. So I was just doing a typical kind of blues shuffle. I could do a really slow feel with it. I could make it more, I could add some funk influence to it. It's all the same song, just with different feels. I could put specific riffs to it. Still the same song, but it sounds like a different song. So the strength of that, and another thing that keeps the blues going is open blues jams. Because once you get something where everybody kind of knows the same song, you can get players that from all different styles and all different levels. People that are just starting off, people that have played for 30, 40, 50 years. They can all come together with that simple structure and have fun playing together. Whereas if you're doing maybe a rock song that's laid out in specific patterns, everybody has to know that song. Or a jazz song that's more complicated, maybe got players that have played for quite a while before they can get all the complexities of it. But with blues songs, since they're almost all the same, there are blues jams everywhere. You don't have rock jams everywhere, you don't have country jams everywhere, because you have to know specific songs. There are some jazz jams, but again, it's players that have usually been playing for quite a while. It's not somebody that's just picked up the instrument a couple months ago. So that's another thing that really helps keep the blues alive and flowing, is the fact that there's blues jams. Up in the Nashville area, you can go to a blues jam any night of the week, and sometimes several. In fact, when we get back, on the way back, we're going to stop in Murfreesboro and go to a jam, and then we're going to head back up to Nashville and go to another later jam, just so we have some fun playing. And jams are a great place to socialize and meet other people that have interest in blues, and it's a great way for me to pick up work. I meet all the other people that are either going to hire me or I'm going to hire them or whatever. So that's another thing that keeps the blues alive, is the fact that this simplicity allows musicians of all levels and styles to communicate and have fun doing it. So, any questions?
Is that a metal guitar?
This is a metal guitar, yeah. This is a resonator guitar. They made guitars that were wood and then had a metal resonator, and they also made them completely out of metal. And this is from 1929. It's the oldest guitar that I own.
Gosh.
What's the difference between a slide guitar and a resonator, or is there a difference?
Not really. Most resonators are great for playing slide. They can also play, normal fretted guitar stuff. Some resonators have a square neck and the strings are like this high, so you can only play slide off. You can't push them down far enough. This one has pretty high action. It's not too comfortable to play normally, but it plays great on slide. But I can still play, regular stuff on it. But I'm pressing really hard to play compared to like an electric guitar.
And how about the dobro?
Dobro is just a brand of a resonator.
Okay.
National is another brand of a resonator. Dobro became so popular that people started calling them Dobros, even though it might not be that brand. Kind of like Kleenex, the brand became, people would call it Kleenexes now.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
Good deal. One of the guys I know and follow is Rob Hicks. Rob plays a dobro. He calls it a dobro. He's more bluegrass than he is.
Right, yeah, he's a lot of bluegrass.
Although he and his buddy have put out a jazz-focused album with Taj Mahal.
Oh, cool.
And Taj plays, as you know, the blues. So.
Yeah,
Interesting combination.
I got a funny Taj Mahal story. I was playing a blues festival in Pinedale, Wyoming, with Taj Mahal. He was the headliner on the festival. My band, Blind Box Smoking, was one of the openers of the festival. And we were also providing the back line of amplifiers for the festival. And Taj was a little upset because we didn't have a Roland JC120, which was the amp that he wanted that specific amp. But I had a lot of amps, but I didn't have that one. So he was grumbling and moaning, and he played through one of my basement amps. And And afterwards, his manager came up and said, "Todd really likes that amp. Can he buy it off you?" I said, "Oh, I really like it too."
Where do you live?
I live up in the Nashville area. So, and I moved here about 3 years ago from Colorado. I was in a band in Denver, and that whole thing kind of came to a halt. I moved here thinking I was going to get right to work and get to playing and so forth. And 2 weeks after I moved here, COVID hit and everything shut down. Oh, great timing.
I have a question about there are 3 basic chords that you use.
Yep.
Seems that country is the same. Are those the same chords?
Country and rock and roll have a lot in common with blues, same chords. I'll do a quick little music theory lesson. They're the 1-4-5 chords, so the chords built off the first, the fourth, and the fifth notes of a scale. With blues, they're almost always going to be dominant chords, which sound like this. With country, they could be dominant chords, but they could also be straight major chords, which would sound more like that. So, but yes, like I said, there's lots of crossover. You can take a blues song and just put a little bit different rhythm to it, and all of a sudden you got a country song, or vice versa.
I took lessons for a few months. Now, not any good, but I took lessons anyway.
Uh-huh.
And it was basically 3 chords also in the lessons that I took, just different configurations of it.
Yeah, 3 chords is, you can say a lot with 3 chords. You know, there's
Okay.
many country, rock, and blues songs where they're all 3 chords. It's the same 3 chords, the first, the fourth, and the fifth chords out of the scale.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
That sounds awfully good. Do they make metal guitars? They'd probably be cheaper to make.
Yeah, they still make them. Yeah. There's a lot of companies that make resonator guitars. And most modern ones would have a pickup. Like this one, there's no way to plug it in, so I'd have to mic it. It gets a little hard to get the right amount of volume to play with the band. But I own a recording studio, and this is great for whenever I need like a really old-time bluesy sound. I mean, this is the guitar to go to. You know, once you get it on record, you can put it as loud or quiet as you need in relation to the band.
Do you have CDs?
I do, but I don't have any with me. I forgot to bring some. The CDs that I've got, I've only got 1 CD out, and it's more of an acoustic. It's got a little bit of bluesy stuff, but it's got gypsy jazz stuff, which I don't know if you're familiar with Django Reinhardt. He was a jazz player in Europe in the 30s and 40s, and he mixed traditional gypsy music with jazz music, and that's kind of what my CD is about for the most part. There's a couple bluesy tunes and a couple classical songs on it.
Can you talk a little bit about maybe some of the history of jazz, you know, the roots of jazz, I guess, in New Orleans, and there's a black, you know, it's integrated with what was going on then.
Right.
And you've touched on that already a little bit. I don't know if you can spend a little more time.
So yeah, a lot of times, let me get out the other guitar and I'll play some comparisons between jazzy stuff and bluesy stuff. So, close enough to tune for rock and roll. So with blues, a lot of times you're going to be sticking with 3 chords. And they're going to be chords that are a little more sophisticated than straight major chords. They're dominant 7 chords. With jazz, one of the first things that happens is the chords get a little more sophisticated. So instead of a chord like that, I might play still the same. You know, I can substitute it in, it still works. And also with jazz, the songs become a little more specific. Instead of just a generic like 12-bar type of thing, it might be like far as the roots and the history of it, you know, New Orleans obviously a big central area where jazz was developed. Jazz was, I think, had more like early influences from ragtime and maybe from Dixieland. You've got more horns involved in it. It's more of an ensemble type of music, whereas blues was originally, you know, acoustic guitar solo guys was more of its roots. So jazz from the beginning was a little more organized. Like I said, the blues guys, being a solo guy, you can just play freely. You don't have to follow a structure because you're not playing with anybody. Whereas jazz from the beginning to me seems like it's been played within groups. So you have to definitely follow a structure. Everybody has to follow the same plan, so to speak, so that it sounds organized together. Jazz, these days, jazz has become a lot more instrumental. There was a thing that happened with jazz in the World War II era. I don't think directly related to World War II, but there was a musician strike from like 43 to 46. And if you look at jazz before that, jazz is popular music, it's got vocals, and it's slow enough that you can dance to it. Whereas after that musician strike, jazz became more instrumental music, it became a lot faster, more complex, it slipped out of its mainstream popularity and became more of an esoteric type of thing. And the interesting thing is we don't really hear the progression smoothly. It almost transitions abruptly because there's that musician strike where there's no recordings almost that happen for about 3 years. You got jazz before it, popular vocals, jazz after it, instrumental, not as popular, a lot faster, a lot more, you know, out there chord changes and so forth. So that's one interesting part of jazz history is that transition between swing and bebop era. So I don't know if that answers your question. Hopefully that gives you a little bit of information.
Yeah. When I was in school, which school? when I was in my teens, one of my favorite musicians was Dwayne Eddy.
Oh yeah.
Did he get into blues some?
Well, if you listen to a lot of his stuff, there's a heavy blues influence. You know, he's not going to be playing traditional blues stuff, but he's one of the first, you know, kind of electric guitar heroes that comes out and plays some instrumental stuff. And I remember my uncle played electric guitar, and he played a lot of Dwayne Eddy stuff. And you know, so that's some of the earliest sounds that I remember hearing.
And I think he called it silky silken strings or something like that was his style.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
He referred it to being sexy, his music. so I automatically liked it.
Yeah, all that 50s rock and roll stuff is heavily blues influence, you know.
Right.
Yeah. Other questions?
We typically have talk back after the service. That way you can just have one-on-one, kind of like we're doing now.
Cool. And we might bring, I've got my son here. His name's Colorado. We might bring him up to do a quick playing demonstration.
Yeah.
And we
Great,
see how
thanks.
blues players play together. And we've also got the president of the Tennessee Blues Society, Kimberly Kagi here. And she just started playing bass a couple months ago, so we might bring her up to play a song and see how someone that has just started playing can, you know, still communicate with a blues musician that's been playing for, you know, decades.
Let's do it. Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah.
Yep.
So take a little
We've
break
got,
and come back and do that.
yes, let's go ahead and do some of that.
Oh, do that right now?
Can we?
Oh, sure, yeah. Okay,
Okay.
cool. So Colorado, why don't you come up and you're gonna play electric guitar. I'll play acoustic guitar. Okay.
Yeah, you get up there.
We've also got Kid Sizemore here who does.
That's what we need.
No. I know, and I don't see any crossover yet.
We're gonna
Get up there
do
and play.
12 bar blues.
It's a different. There is no crossover.
Here's the solo. change chords at the same time and be coordinated in our rhythms together. And electric guitar, modern sound, old resonator guitar, old sound, works perfect together.
Yes.
All right, Nicolay, let's have you come up and play a song on bass for us. I'll play the guitar. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I lose my smile, I lose everything.
That's some Oreos.
Well, let's stand and sing 414.
Let's have some accompaniment to 414. Blues accompaniment.
Oh, wow. As we
Leave this friendly place, love give light to every face. May the kind